Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Operation Swipe Right, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Daughter to Artemis, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Dani.
A note for our dear listeners on the previous Chapter 5 and today's Chapter 6 of Operation Swipe Right. Chapter 5 and 6 are self-contained, but have a different underlying emotional tone that leads into the final chapter of this story. Today's Chapter 6 is the fluffy version of the story and how Sarah admits her feelings for Tally. So now, we continue at Chapter 6, The Fluffy Road. To new beginnings? Isadora asked as she raised her glass up, tilting it towards Anacostia. Anna smiled. To new chances. They clinked their glasses together, the ring of it in their ears settling something far deeper within them. Tonight would be the beginning of something new for them all. Tally was seated at the bar, waiting. She looked at the time and sighed. Sarah was due to arrive in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. That was such a short amount of time, and yet it felt like an eternity could fit inside these 10 minutes. Tally kept her promise. She didn't order an alcoholic beverage, though she really felt like it might calm her nerves. But Anacostia had ordered her not to drink, and she was going to follow orders, because there was a chance her sister was right, and the alcohol would only make her even more nervous, which, as she felt her skin literally tingling all over with a clammy sort of buzz, she didn't think it was possible, but she wasn't about to test that. Tally rolled her shoulders as she sat on the bar stool. She spun a cocktail straw around and around her diet soda, her eyes staring towards the front door of the restaurant. She sat at the far end of the bar, and the moment she felt Sarah coming, because she could always sense Sarah before she saw her, she would duck behind the couple that was flirting right next to her. Whenever Sarah entered a room, she always checked for the exits and for the general reaction of the place when she arrived. It was a habitual process that she had down to almost an art form. It never really looked like Sarah was actually scouring the room with her eyes as she cut through it, but she was, always. Knowing that, Tally understood she would need to duck and hide so that Sarah didn't see her before she even made it to the table. That would ruin this whole thing before it even started. Tally bit her bottom lip, feeling suddenly sick to her stomach. What was the rest of this evening going to hold for her? Was this even going to work? What if the reason Sarah never said she wanted more from Tally was because she honestly didn't want more from her? That was an actual possibility. These what-ifs plagued her and had been plaguing her for years. Years! But she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to talk with Sarah about this now. No more waiting. No more hours spent wondering about all the countless possibilities. After tonight, Tally would know one way or another what her future held with Sarah. It was as exhilarating as it was terrifying, but Tally was prepared to know. One way or the other, finally. Can I get you something else? The bartender asked, noticing how Tally was sipping at the last of her soda. Something to calm the nerves, maybe? The woman smiled. That obvious, huh? To those who are good at looking, yeah. The bartender nodded as she cleaned off the bar to Tally's left. First date jitters? Tally chuckled. Something like that. And nothing like that. This, yeah, she suppose could be considered her first date with Sarah, but Sarah didn't even know that she was going on a date with her. So did it count? And then there was, of course, the fact that they had already slept together 4 times in the last 4 years. Not very many when one thought about it, but it was still a part of their history, something that made their relationship unique and special to just the both of them. Here, a shot on the house. She was already reaching for a shot glass and pulling down a bottle of vodka. No, 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 thank you. Tally reached out and covered the top of the shot glass to stop any from being poured into it. I promised I wouldn't drink. Thank you, though. That's very nice of you. Tally politely refused the kind offer. Just another diet soda, please. You got it. The soda's on the house, too. She winked as she took Tally's glass and refilled it, plopped in another lemon, and went to fill the drink orders that were brought to her by one of the waiters. Tally stared down at the floating lemon wedge and found herself smiling. The back of her neck tingled as the hairs there began to rise. A flush fell over her cheeks and warmed her from a specific place within her chest. Her eyes slowly looked towards the entryway. Tally slid her stool just enough to the right that she was hidden by the group of friends chatting amicably diagonally from her, and she watched. Tally watched as Sarah came in through the door and was greeted by the hostess. They offered to take her coat, but she politely refused. She did, however, take off the leather jacket, the one that Tally had found at a thrift store during the first year of the Second Camarilla War, and had given it to Sarah for Yule. It had been small, the gift giving that year, as that was when they were still on the run from the federal government. But Sarah had kept it. Seemed to like it even. So much so that it was the same jacket that Sarah wore when she stood outside Tally's apartment in Germany the night before Beltane. And, oh, Sarah had changed. She wasn't in the same black outfit that she had been in before Tally left. Shame. Tally really thought the outfit made Sarah look incredibly sexy, even if it also made it look like she could be going to a funeral. Sarah now wore a long-sleeved white button-up blouse and a black sling-back vest that only began its buttons beneath Sarah's bust, which of course Tally shouldn't have even been staring at, even if she was across the restaurant from Sarah and couldn't be seen. Her cheeks flushed as she ducked her head low as Sarah's eyes peered around her surroundings as she was led towards the table where Anacostia and Isidore were seated, chatted and flirting and drinking wine. Anna and Isadora stood to greet Sarah, and Sarah took the seat that would make it very obvious she was deliberately facing the front doors. Always vigilant, even now. 3 years into peace. Tally found it as endearing as she did sad. Sarah was greeting Isadora when Anacostia turned to meet Tally's eyes. Her sister raised a single brow, wondering if and when Tally planned to join them. Tally swallowed convulsively. It was time. 4 years. No, 8 years later, and it was time. She was finally going to be free of this vow, one way or the other. And Goddess, this was a lot. She had no more time to worry. It was now or never, and Tally looked away from the table of three, suddenly overcome with a sudden wave of nausea she couldn't calm, and she couldn't keep down. Tally covered her mouth and stood from her seat and quickly made her way towards the ladies' room. Anacostia stared after Tally's retreating back until her mother's voice cut through her worry. Anna? Hmm? Anacostia turned towards her mother, watching as she sat down so her back was to the far wall and she was facing the front door. They had left that seat open for her particularly, knowing Sarah's preferences. Or rather, Tally had insisted they leave it open for her. But it was a habit Anna knew all too well, and she'd certainly inherited from her mother. Sarah smiled teasingly at her daughter. I was just asking if I had arrived too early. Anna blinked, not following. As Isidora's friend is not here yet. Sarah tilted her head as she stared at her daughter. Something wasn't quite right. Oh, well, you are a little early. She should be here soon. Right, Isa? Anna asked as she turned to face Isadora, imploring the scientist with her eyes alone to follow the lead, since Tally had just gone MIA. Isadora looked between Anakosha's circular wide eyes and Sarah's narrowing gaze. Yes, she should arrive just on time. She is prompt, but does not like to arrive early. Which was not a lie. Tally preferred to arrive at the starting time for an event, unless it was something one of her sisters or Sarah was hosting. Then she would arrive early, hours early, to help them set up and with any last minute arrangements. Whereas if it was a function Tally had to attend due to her rise in rank, Tally arrived exactly on time, made a short stint of an appearance, and then left. Unless she synced up with Sarah, then she stayed for as long or short a time as Sarah did, and happily escaped or mingled with her. Very well. Sarah accepted Isadora's explanation, though she did keep a close eye on her daughter, who kept nervously peering towards the bar. The waiter, having noticed Sarah arrive, made his way over to the table. Good evening. I'm Henry. I'll be your server this evening. Are we waiting for your fourth party member? Yes, all three women replied. Understood. Well, while you wait, may I start you off with something to drink? Isadora smiled across the table at her friend as she sipped from her own wine. We have already begun. She indicated the half-finished bottle of wine she and Anna had been drinking as they talked and flirted. Sarah grimaced as she looked at the sweet wine upon the table. Tally would love the label, but Sarah preferred something stronger. Yes, single malt would be lovely. A finer label, both Anna and Isadora informed the waiter who took the provided information before disappearing. Am I that predictable? Only with certain things. Isadora tried to be placating, but Anakasha decided to begin listing all of the things her mother was predictable over. Yes, where you sit, how you sit. You arrive 15 minutes early, every time without fail. And to be honest, Mother, your alcohol choice is legendary at this point. Sarah fought a grin as she listened to Anakasha list off the many things she had become predictable over. Strange, as she always prided herself on being able to stun anyone. It had once been a game she and the biddies played throughout the years. Just how far she could make each individual president's jaw drop with something she said or did. The thought of the biddies was bittersweet, and for a moment Sarah relished the moment of her thoughts of them all, knowing they too would have been able to list off hundreds of things she was predictable over, while also listing off thousands of things that made her unpredictable as well. Well, then, perhaps I should endeavor to be more unpredictable. Sarah's smile was sly, and she enjoyed how Anakasha's eyes widened, and she shook her head no very minutely. Please, goddess, don't. It was not Anakasha that spoke. The last time you were unpredictable, I ended up catching your unconscious body as it came flying out of the mycelium. It was a scare that Isadora could and would happily live without having to face again. Just the once was good for her, and for Sarah, as her friend was once again part of the living. Oh, no, 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 that couldn't have been the last. You do know about the time that she gave Petra a sex book outlining the best positions for pleasurable sex, don't you? Anakasha asked with glee, her eyes literally shining with mirth over the recalled memory. That was a lovely gift. She thanked me for it, Sarah complained half-heartedly, though seeing Isadora's eyes widen and her jaw drop did mean the necro hadn't been aware of that particular gift. That wasn't even a gag gift. She had been complaining that since her injury, she and her, many husbands were having difficulties. The book was just meant to help alleviate some of that stress. You gave Petra Bellwether a sex book. Isadora had to confirm this because how in the world had she not known this? Oh, she did, Anakasha insisted, laughing at how fascinated Isadora became. And she lived to tell about it, so I suppose she isn't wrong about Petra being thankful for it. After she got that book, Petra certainly calmed down a bit. Anna internally winced at how difficult it had been serving beneath an uptight and emotionally compromised Petra Bellwether. I, of course, had offered her the best mind fixers first, as she was highly depressed. But it seems the sex book is all that is remembered. Sarah shrugged. though internally she felt like cackling. Oh, when I was what, 10? And Akasha knew what memory Anakasha was thinking of instantly at that age. She pinched the bridge of her nose even as she fought off a smile. 11. Right! 11! You and Victoria. Victoria? Isadora asked quietly, not recalling a Victoria. One of my biddies, Sarah explained, and Isadora nodded. Right. So you and Victoria played it was a rite of passage prank, right? On Jamie. She had just been biddied. Yes, a week before. Sarah smiled fondly, thinking of Victoria and Jamie. Anacostia grinned. You set the carpet in front of the fireplace on fire, and I was sitting in the chair in front of it. Oh, and she sent the image to Jamie. Anacostia turned to Isadora as she continued. But something unexpected for the prank was that Jamie had been in the shower, and she came rushing into the office, totally naked, covered in suds and carrying a shower cap with water to put out the flames. Anacostia laughed till she had tears in her eyes. Oh, that was not something I had ever expected to see. I hadn't realized she was in the shower, was Sarah's only excuse. That surely wasn't the best of her unpredictability moments. The three women at the table turned at the sudden sound of another voice, one directly to their left, having made her way from the ladies' room to stand at their table. Face newly rinsed with cold water, her nervous jitters buried as deep as they could possibly be. If I recall correctly, the best prank. We might as well call them pranks at this point, as that is what most of them are. Tally. Sarah breathed the Noah's name reverently, supremely surprised and thrilled to see her. Sarah's eyes were shining as she stared at the unexpected visage of Tally in front of them. Was this the same restaurant that Tally was having dinner with Garrett and Hillary? What a coincidence! A happy one. For any time Sarah got to spend with Tally was wanted, craved even. Tally grabbed the back of the chair she vacated before her dismissal to the bar to calm down. She smiled as she held Sarah's eyes. The best prank was when you gifted Nikta those enchanted earplugs that instead of keeping the sounds of our bunkmates' intimacies from her, they amplified the sound. Tally grinned wickedly, recalling how Nikta had screamed Sarah's name so loudly the house, more like the shack they'd been hiding in, had shook. And the intimacies between Adil and Abigail, and Rael and Scylla, had stalled for a short time as Nikta charged like a bull in a china shop to where Sarah was cackling in the living room where she'd been sleeping on the couch. Tally remembered how frightened she'd been, thinking Nikta was finally going to have to kill Sarah. Tally had never run as fast as she had from the room she'd been sharing with Quinn and Kalita to that living room, ready, if she needed, to get between the two older witches. She had been the first one in the living room, after Nikta, and had watched as Nikta grabbed a pillow, a far less deadlier weapon than Tally had been expecting, and whacked Sarah half a dozen times before Sarah grabbed the pillow from the enraged spree founder. It served her right. Sarah felt giddy as she recalled that particular prank. She had taken far too much enjoyment out of everyone's discomfort from my cooking. Well, that was very true. Nikta had been relentless in her teasing of Sarah after her first and second cooking misadventure. Yes, but did you have to have me be the one to give them to her? Of course I did. Sarah stated it as if it was a fact known to all people. She wouldn't have taken them from me. Even now, Sarah wasn't sure Nikta would take a gift from her, which was why at Yule, Tally typically was the mediator between Sarah and Nikta and exchanged the gifts between the two of them. Tally grinned as she pulled the chair out for herself and sat down, noting the moment Sarah's happiness at seeing her here was suddenly tinged with a splash of confusion. Sarah looked from where Tally suddenly sat to the two women to her right. They weren't saying anything. Rather, they both looked rather relieved to see Tally. But wasn't that seat meant for Isadora's friend? Were they not waiting for someone else to join them? Not that Sarah was going to ask Tally to leave. She was just surprised that neither Isadora or Anacostia said anything about Tally taking the seat. This was their double date, after all, and Sarah was just here to help mediate and keep things as lively as she could. or so that's what she'd been led to believe. "Oh, wonderful! You're back!" Henry, their waiter, greeted as he came back to the table with Sarah's whiskey and noted Tally seated in the formerly empty seat. Back? What did he mean, back? Had Tally been sitting here before Sarah arrived? "Would you like to hear our specials?" Henry continued, completely missing the growing tension around the table. "I'd love to." Tally smiled at him as she looked over her shoulder at him. While Henry listed off the 5 rather specific dishes, none of them Sarah couldn't hope to recall, and Akash and Isadora watched Sarah very, very carefully. "That does sound delicious. I think I'll have the salmon oreganata with the charred asparagus, and surprise me on the carb." Tally handed Henry her menu. "Oh, and if you wouldn't mind a club soda or a ginger ale?" Henry took the order with a kind grin. "We have both. Would you prefer the club?" Ginger ale, actually. Thank you." Tally smacked Henry with her dimples, and the poor man flushed ever so slightly as he stepped around the table to take the rest of the table's order. "Are you still feeling ill?" Sarah asked, leaning across the table, for a moment ignoring the half-dozen other questions she had at the tip of her tongue. Just a little nervous still. Nothing that bread and ginger ale can't fix." Tally tried to be as reassuring as she could, but she knew her voice shook. Not because she didn't feel well, but because her stomach was literally in knots as she sat here at this table beside Sarah Alder as her date. It was just, well, Sarah didn't know that Sarah was sitting next to her date for the night. Not yet. Did things with Garrett and Hillary not go well? Are they... Did they cancel? Sarah asked, looking around the restaurant. She hadn't seen them when she'd made her way to the table, and she had been thorough in her look around the dining room. Though Sarah realized that as she had been thorough in looking around the dining room, she had not noticed Tally, which felt like a sin in and of itself. Sarah relied too heavily on her own intuition to know where Tally was at any given time, and although she had been focused on keeping herself calm so she would not embarrass Anakasha this evening, she should have felt that tingle at the back of her neck, the one that caused the hairs on her whole body to rise and warmth to settle in the center of her breastbone. That feeling had always told her Tally was near, long before she ever saw the knower. "Oh, well, we'll talk about that later," Tally offered, but more asked than anything. Sarah did not wish to wait. She wanted to understand what was going on and why Tally was joining them for dinner, and Anakasha and Isadora weren't upset that Tally had taken their blind date's place. Perhaps the woman had canceled and Anakasha had called Tally in a panic? No, no. Why wouldn't Anna just tell her that? Isadora and Anakasha placed their orders, and Henry cleared his throat when he arrived to Sarah. "Do you know what you would like?" Sarah hadn't even opened her menu, so no, she was not sure what she would like. "I am going to need another moment." You'll probably like their veal francese and the penne. Same sauce. It's delicious." Tally suggested, and Sarah turned back to her with a raised brow. "Promise." Sarah's head was reeling, but she picked up her menu and handed it to Henry. "The veal francese with the penne and same sauce," Sarah recited back to him, ignoring how Anakasha snickered at her so easily just taking Tally's suggestion. It wasn't as if Tally had led her astray before. No, that wasn't true. There were a few dishes that Tally had led her completely astray with, but it had been quite a long time ago since then. And those first few incidents had been in the very beginning of their food adventures, before Tally and Sarah herself learned Sarah's preferences. "Extra on the sauce, Henry, and medium rare on the veal, please," Tally requested on Sarah's behalf, knowing how Sarah hated dry meat. Henry jotted down Tally's notes onto his notepad. "Any appetizers for either of you?" Henry asked as he looked between Tally and Sarah. Did he not understand that Sarah needed him to leave because she had so many questions she needed to ask of Tally Craven and her daughter, who was surely an accomplice to whatever this was? "No," Sarah snapped, a bit too roughly. Tally reached across the space between her and Sarah and squeezed her hand, hoping it would help calm the woman. Sarah grit her teeth and took a deep breath before she looked to Henry. Thank you. Tally looked longingly at Henry. Bread? Will bread be brought out? Henry nodded quickly. Yes, with olive oil, or would you prefer butter? Either would be great. Thank you, Henry. My pleasure. Henry smiled as he bowed his head a little to Tally, and then went to put in their dinner order. Dimple strikes again, Anacostia chuckled, reveling in Tally's blush. Another heart stolen. Do make sure if he swears fealty to you, he understands what he's getting himself into, huh? Anacostia grinned as she toasted to Tally with her half-full wine-glass. Tally grinned wickedly at Anacostia, even as she kept her hand resting atop Sarah's. I don't know. I think he'd have a pretty good idea of what it would mean. Anacostia scuffed. Unrequited love from afar for years. Sure. Check. Hey, I never promised to love any of those that swore fealty to me. To the army! The army. They'd pledged themselves to the army and the cause. It wasn't just me. Yeah, tell that to Nikta Baton. Anacostia grinned, nearly laughing as Tally blushed, her cheeks flushing despite this being an old joke. It still always landed and caused the redhead to get embarrassed. I did always wonder why she was so eager to switch sides. Isadora sipped at her drink, hiding behind its rim and the et tu, Brute glare that Tally sent her way. Sarah's mouth hung only slightly open as her eyes flickered between Tally and Akasha and then to Isadora. What in the world was going on? Is no one going to explain what is happening? What would you like us to explain, Mother? Anacostia asked, though the jovial tone and ease around the table disappeared as if a cold bucket of ice water had been doused over the three smiling women. Tally's hand tightened its grip on Sarah's, and her carefree grin from a moment ago slackened slowly, just as her hand began to withdraw from Sarah's as well. The general frowned, watching as Tally put her hand on her lap and straightened herself up in her seat. Why is... Sarah stopped asking her question and turned from Anacostia's nervous eyes to look at Isadora. Is your friend not coming? No, Isadora answered plainly. We thought you would not mind if Tally were your date this evening. Not needing to explain much more than that. Sarah felt as if the ground beneath her had suddenly caved in. Her hands gripped tightly at the edge of the table to ensure she did not sink into the hole that was surely forming beneath her. Why else would her stomach have fallen as it did? She was falling into something deep. Surely that explained why she felt as if she were floating without Salva. Tally as her date. For the evening? That was... Of course she would not mind that. But there was more to this. Sarah could feel it. There was too much tension in the air around them for all this to be so simple. And the way that Tally's smile faltered at the edges as she were nervous and afraid of being caught, well, Sarah knew Tally well enough to know that something else was going on here, especially with the way the three women around her kept stealing glances at each other. Isadora and Anacostia each looked more to Tally than the other way around, signaling that whatever was happening was orchestrated by the knower. Tally. Sarah turned her full attention to the redhead. Do not take this as an insult, as I would much prefer to spend the evening with you than a woman I never met, but why do I feel as if there is more to this than meets the eye? Tally stiffened as soon as the question was asked. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but nothing escaped. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched Tally seem to struggle to voice anything at all. Your bread fresh from the oven. Henry grinned, oblivious, and deposited 2 steaming baskets of various types of bread to the table, and a refreshing ginger ale. He placed a cup of frizzing soda in front of Tally. With great difficulty, Tally turned away from Sarah's gaze and smiled at Henry. Her hands were shaking as she reached out for the cup, happily sipping from the straw as she tried to settle her rolling stomach and racing heart. Tals, Anacostia leaned a bit over the table. Your color's a little... I know, Tally hissed, already well aware of how pale she probably looked. She had only tried to answer Sarah's simple question. Why was she here? And yet her body had revolted. All color in her cheeks had fled, and she looked gray around the gills. Her stomach was so nauseated that she felt like she needed to go back into the bathroom and hide away as she gagged up nothing. There was nothing left in her stomach to lose, just bile. Goddess. She hated how stress affected her body, how stressful this had become when it should have been joyous. Here. Isadora ripped a piece of the piping hot bread off and put it a plate in front of Tally after lathering it with a good helping of butter. You need to eat. No, what she needed was for this working to be broken. That is what she needed. For now, she would accept the bread and ginger ale and the kindness both Isadora and Akasha were showing her, even if she felt like she didn't deserve it, not as she saw Sarah's brow creasing through the corner of her eyes. Sarah felt a pit form in her stomach. Tally, as Anacostia noted, did not look well. Her color had vanished as if into thin air. If you're ill, perhaps I should take you home. Tally shook her head aggressively in the negative, tears pricking at her eyes as her vision swam. No, no, she couldn't leave. Not yet. They hadn't even gotten their appetizers or told Sarah what was happening. She couldn't possibly go home. Not yet. Sarah was confused. It was obvious that Tally was in distress. But rather than looking to Sarah for help, like she always had, Tally was turning to Isadora. It was perplexing. What was it that Isadora could help Tally with that Sarah could not? Why was Tally not saying anything to her at all? Perhaps Isadora and Anna should be the ones to take you home. Was that what would make the difference? If Isadora and Anna were the ones to bring Tally home and not Sarah? Why that would be Sarah had no idea. She could not understand why Tally was even here, let alone why Tally would refuse to let Sarah assist her when she was so obviously in distress. Tally turned to Sarah, and there was this desperate look in her eyes, as if she wanted to speak of so many things, but was kept from doing so. The depth of emotion swirling around in Tally's glistening eyes tore at Sarah's heart. Sarah itched with the need to soothe and comfort Tally, but she just didn't know how. No, please. I'd like to stay. There. Tally was able to at least say that much, even if to do so she had to cover her mouth with the back of her hand and pray she didn't either get sick or pass out across the table. Sarah nodded slowly. You truly, Tally, you do not look well. Sarah frowned, hating how stubborn Tally could be when it came to her own health. Tally laughed self-deprecatingly and ducked her head to hide from Sarah's stare. I am sure Isadora and Anacostia will not mind if the evening were cut short. Sarah turned to each woman she mentioned, expecting them to agree with her, so that there would be a united front against Tally's stubbornness. But instead of a unified front with her, she saw that both Anacostia and Isadora were siding with Tally. If she wants to stay, I don't see why she can't, Anacostia offered with a shrug. What? No, it was if Tally was sick, she needed to go home and rest. Will one of you not tell me what is going on? Sarah asked, beginning to lose patience. There were always two surefire ways for Sarah to lose her patience. One was being lied to. The other was being coddled, and she suspected that both were currently happening. Ma, Anacostia offered a reassuring smile as she touched Sarah's shoulder, the touch helping to calm Sarah for another moment. Just give us some time, okay? We want to talk to you about everything. It's just not easy. Goddess above and below, what was it that they needed to talk to her about that was so damn difficult? The pit in Sarah's stomach grew as she jumped from conclusion to conclusion, one worse than the last. Sarah refused to admit it, but her hands shook beneath the table as her worry deepened. As Anacostia held Sarah's gaze, Isadora leaned over and whispered to Tally, who looked positively green as she shook her head no from side to side. Please, Tally whispered, holding Isadora's eyes. Sarah watched the interaction through the corner of her eye and waited. waited to see what Isadora would decide. Sarah could trust that Isadora would not put Tally in any unneeded danger. If Isadora did not insist that Tally leave, then she did not need to leave. Tally asked us to sit up this evening so she could talk with you about something important, Isadora began. Tally grasped at Isadora's hand and squeezed it, her expression thanking the scientist. But for what? What was this all about? There was never a double date, Sarah asked, piecing this together. No, not in the sense we told you. It was always going to be the four of us. Sarah nodded. Okay. That after everything that had happened thus far made sense, but why? She asked. This is where it gets more complicated, Isadora sighed as she looked between Anacostia and Tally. Her patience was gone. Are you sick? Sarah's voice cracked around the question, her eyes boring into Tally, begging the younger woman to look at her. Sick. Not the type of sick that would result in one day huddled over the toilet, but a sickness that would result in hours, days, months spent in the infirmary or Isadora's lab. There had been so many witches that had come down with illnesses after the war, illnesses that had been manufactured by the Camarilla. Tally, like Sarah and thousands of others, had been on the front lines. They had been exposed more than others, but they had been well thus far. It had been 3 years, and Tally had been well and untouched by the illnesses, as had Sarah and Abigail. Rael had not fared as well as them. Sarah slid her chair closer to Tally and reached out to the younger woman, needing to touch her, to reassure herself that she was well with her own 2 hands as her eyes could lie to her. Sarah frowned as she felt how cold and clammy Tally's hand was beneath her own. Tally's eyes softened as she shook her head. No, oh, no, Sarah, I'm not sick. Tally squeezed Sarah's hand and finally met Sarah's eyes. Not like that. I will be fine, no matter what. Promise. The reassurance missed its mark. Why would there need to be a no matter what? What was there that could possibly make Tally not okay? Sarah refused to let go of Tally's hand now that she had hold of it. But as she held Tally's watery brown eyes, it was obvious that she wasn't going to be the one explaining what was going on. Though she did seem to try, but the more that she tried, the more color she lost in her cheeks, and her breathing hollowed out. It terrified Sarah. Sarah, Tally can't tell you what she's doing here tonight because she worked herself into an unbreakable promise. Isadora spoke, breaking the otherwise tense silence at the table. Sarah looked away from Tally slowly, her curious eyes looking to Isadora with 1,001 questions. Sarah blinked. What? What kind of working had Tally gotten herself into that would keep her silent on a simple question of what was she doing here this evening? Surely Isadora had to be mistaken. Sarah knew that Tally had created a new canon working that was being used all over the world by officers in witch armies. Tally's seed that made it impossible for a person to break a promise, a covenant, personal or professional, was brilliant. It was similar to the working that had gone into the Accords. The Accords working was what Tally had studied to help find a way to maximize the potential use of that type of working. In many cases, it helped intelligence officers keep secrets, and had it been canon while Tally was a cadet, well, there would have been many things that were different had it been usable canon work back then. Even today, it wasn't taught to just anyone. Only select witches, knowers, usually high-ranking and in the intelligence fields of their countries, were taught how to use the working. Sarah herself knew the work because she had helped Tally create it, but she had never used it on anyone, nor on herself. If Tally had worked herself into a promise, an unbreakable one, what exactly had she promised that would keep her silent to Sarah's inquiries about this evening and being here, with them at dinner as her date? Wasn't that what this had been? A double date? with an attractive officer who was hung up on someone else so Sarah would not need worry about hurting the woman's feelings by only attending this double date this once for Anna and Isadora's benefit alone? That was what she had agreed to, but yet that had never been the plan. Plan had always been for Tally to be the one sitting here. Tally Craven, who sat in front of her, looking at her so hopefully, so balefully that Sarah's breath was caught somewhere within her chest and refused to oxygenate her body. Isadora swallowed nervously. The sudden intensity of Sarah's eyes put her on edge. The soft touch of Anakashta's hand against hers helped settle her, strengthen her. But there was nothing like staring into General Sarah Alder's eyes when she knew you held information she wanted. No, needed. It had always been unnerving in a professional setting, but now, in a personal one, it was somehow even worse. Your first Beltane. Isadora took a deep breath, her eyes flickering from Sarah to Tally. Sarah blinked and thought, Goddess, what did their first Beltane have to do with any of this? Weren't they talking about this evening? Tonight? What vow had Tally made that was keeping her silent about their evening together? Tonight. Not their night together 4 years ago. Beltane. What? Isadora, you're not making any sense. Sarah really needed Isadora to start making sense. Isadora flinched at the ire in Sarah's voice. Mother, let her finish, Anakashta asked, begged. Please. Sarah wanted to growl. Very well. She offered a silent apology to her friend and waited, as patiently as she could, for Isadora to continue. I don't know if I can do this, Isadora whispered as she met Anakashta's eyes. Anakashta turned to Isadora and offered her a reassuring smile. Hey, you can do this. Just slit her throat. Tally quaffed at the terminology, Isadora's own version of ripping off the Band-Aid. Isadora grinned and took comfort and amusement from Anakashta's support. Your first Beltane together, Tally promised you that she wouldn't ever ask you for more than you were willing to give, never take from you, or pressure you into wanting something more. With her. Isadora cringed. She was not explaining this well. Goddess help her. Tally meant it so much she pushed it into herself, a working, that has kept her physically incapable of telling you that she wants more from her relationship with you. Because you need to be the one to ask for more. She can't be the one to ask for what she wants, as the working prevents her from doing so. So she can keep her promise to you, to not ask for anything more. No, Sarah wanted to shake her head, because that was impossible, wasn't it? There were contingencies around getting trapped in such a vow. It was contingencies that Tally herself had created, but oh. Sarah's eyes widened. Of course. Tally knew that these contingencies would need to be created because she had worked herself into an unbreakable vow before she created them. With no one to ground her and break her free from her own promise, Tally was forced to remain in the loop of her own working. Isadora called Sarah's name and waited until Sarah was focused on her once again and not lost in her own thoughts. Sarah, Tally, she was so adamant not to take more from you than what you were willing to give that she trapped herself in silence. She's done it before, Anna spoke up, drawing Sarah's eyes to her daughter. With us. With me and our sisters. We promised. Anna swallowed thickly, trying to push herself to say something that wouldn't cause her to break the promise she'd given Tally. We promised her, and we all meant it. Wanted so much for her. And you. That we were all trapped in it. Sarah's eyes swelled with tears. You knew too? Anna nodded her head, unable to verbalize anything more than that without feeling like she was about to get sick all over the tabletop between them all. Sarah blinked as she tried to process what she was hearing. Has everyone known? Isadora was quick to confirm. Yes, in a way, kind of. Isadora looked from Anna and Tally, wishing that they had chosen someone else to be their messenger, someone else that was more eloquent than her. Anna and the Bellwether unit. Tally worked them into an unbreakable vow as well. They cannot talk with you about your feelings for Tally or Tally's feelings for you, even though they all have wanted to. The question wasn't why had they remained quiet, because Isadora and Anakasha had just answered that. They had all been trapped in their silence. The only one that had been unaffected by working was her. And what excuse did she have? To have left her and Tally in this goddess-forsaken limbo for so long? What excuse did she have, other than the simple truth? Fear. Sarah had been, and still was, afraid. Utterly terrified. Sarah was not a fearful person, or she hadn't been before the mycelium, before she had come to realize just how fragile her life and legacy truly were. Before the war, before her death and rebirth, Sarah had been strong and sure in the heart of any incoming threat, any raging storm. But since then she had to learn how to dig and cultivate her roots so she wasn't uplifted and blown over by the softest of winds. Sarah had grown soft since her return. She developed and learned of her new vulnerabilities in herself that she had to protect. But somehow found in her family, she didn't need to protect them alone. But her family could not protect her from herself. Not in this instance. Not when they were all trying to keep her safe by remaining silent within the working Tally had trapped them in. Years. It had been years. Years. Sarah stared at the three women around her, flabbergasted. How had Tally been able to trap all of them into the same vow? Why would they have been willing to make that promise to Tally? Sarah looked away from Isadora, staring intently at Tally, who sat looking so very hopeful, even if she looked like she hadn't slept in 10 years. The gray pallor of her cheeks and how sunken in her eyes were worried Sarah immensely. Why? Sarah breathed out the question, hardly able to make it past her lips. Tally grit her teeth and was able to say 2 words. In fear. Fear, Sarah could understand. It had been what kept her quiet the last 4 years. 4 long years, where she had hoped Tally would be the one to express how she felt for Sarah, that Tally would reassure Sarah she wasn't pressing her luck, hoping that the beautiful, kind, empathetic, passionate, and stubborn knower felt something for the jaded, dishonest, obsessive, firm her. Isadora continued for Tally and squeezed the Major's hands tightly. Fear that she or they would scare you off and ruin the relationship you two already had. The working prevented any of them from talking with you about it. If I understand it correctly, it sometimes keeps them from talking to Tally about it as well. But Isadora couldn't be 100% sure of that, not without confirmation from Tally and Anna. Sarah didn't look away from Tally's eyes. It was there, like it always was. The longing and desperation in Tally's eyes, it was there. That feeling, that emotion that Tally always expressed with her eyes as she stared at Sarah. The depth of it was as deep as the soil itself and just as constant, always right there at the surface, shining so brightly like a beacon, begging Sarah to come closer, to see it and to feel it, to know and understand exactly what it meant and what it wanted from her. That feeling, that hope, it was staring right at her, just like the hope Sarah often looked back on Tally with. Holding Tally's eyes, Sarah asked Isadora one last question. And you? I never made any such promises, and I only learned about this recently. It is why Anakasha and Tally set up this evening. Tally was always the witch you were going to be set up with. Sarah finally pulled her eyes away from Tally. They narrowed a bit as she looked between Anakasha and Isadora. Something wasn't sitting right with her about what Isadora was saying. So you and Anna aren't dating? Well, we weren't. Isadora blushed as she felt Anakashta's hand resting on her knee beneath the table. But we will be after this evening. Anakashta's chin dropped even as she smiled, suddenly bashful about the whole thing. Alone. No offense to either of you, but I prefer to spend time with Anna alone. Tally smiled and lifted her one hand, as the other was still grasping tightly between Sarah's. No offense taken at all. Tally smiled, knowing that Sarah was a bit behind in the development between Anakashta and Isadora, as Sarah hadn't been here to see them kiss. This reassurance was also the first thing Tally had been able to easily say since Isadora began her explanation, as it did not interfere with her breaking her vow in the slightest. And it was nice to be able to talk and stretch her jaw a bit, even if the sound of her voice drew Sarah's piercing steel blue eyes back to her. And oh, how she always loved to be the center of Sarah's attention. It sent a thrill down her spine every time. I was the one that was going to explain all of this to you, as neither Tally or Anakashta can. Sarah felt as if her chest exploded at the explanation, that her heart, the feeble, dastardly organ that didn't seem to know whether it wanted to live in her chest or her throat, burst. That micro speck of hope expanded into a black hole swirling and ready to consume everything. Sarah reached a trembling hand tentatively across the table towards Tally, but she stopped just short of touching her. She swallowed down the sudden lump in her throat and pushed through it, that kernel of hope that had transformed into a swirling mass of dark energy ready to consume everything it touched, leaving nothing in its wake. Nothing but a desperate, hopeful mess of a woman. Tally, is this true? Yes, it was all true! Tally wanted to scream those words, uncaring if the sound of her cries could burst her eardrums. She wanted to affirm to Sarah that everything Isadora was saying was true, and she wanted to expand upon every layer of it so that Sarah could understand and could know just how deeply she loved her. But she couldn't. Tally's whole body trembled, and her gray cheeks lost all their color, as she suddenly looked green. She forced her head, which felt like it was turning into sediment rock, to move up just enough and down, and again just enough, to form a single confirming nod. That nod cost her greatly, as the working made her head swim with dizziness and she fought to keep consciousness. She left her whole body spasming and her eyes practically rolling into the back of her head. Sarah's breathing hitched as Tally began to convulse like she was hit with a continuous bolts of electricity. Tally! Sarah stood from her seat, knocking her own chair over as she sped around the curve of the table and caught Tally just before she fell off the chair. Isadora, who was seated to Tally's left, reached out to try and help steady the tilted over knower, with Sarah helping to put her back into the center mass of the chair and Isadora holding her arm. She was less likely to fall to the floor. Sarah's heart pounded dangerously within her chest as she bent down, her hands firm on Tally's shoulders to keep her steady. She felt panic, though she was holding her composure, even as her eyes flitted between Tally's fluttering eyelashes to Isadora and Anakashta. Isadora frowned as she watched Tally convulse. The working, it prevents her, any of them, from breaking the vow without feeling physical side effects. Yes, Sarah knew that in extreme cases of this working, the person could literally go into shock when trying to break the vow. It was why the working was so effective. Normally, there was a keeper of the secret, someone that could break the one trapped in the vow out of it and freeing them. And most of these vows were planned and the keeper of the secret ready and in place ahead of time. But this working on Tally and her sisters was impromptu and unwitting. There was no keeper, no one to break it for them. Stay with me, Tally, Sarah whispered, begging the younger woman to remain conscious. Sarah felt sick to her stomach to know that if Tally had ever tried to break this working on her own, she would end up like this. Should we leave? Sarah asked, unsure what they should do. Was Tally comfortable remaining in this public place while she was not in control of herself? Home, Tally whispered, her head falling heavily back against the wood of her chair. Please. She felt sick and weak, far too weak to remain sitting in the middle of this high-end restaurant where anyone could see her trembling like an electrician caught with her finger in a live socket. Anna raised her arm, and Henry, who had been standing off to the side watching their table in concern since Sarah had knocked over her chair to catch Tally, came rushing over. "The check, please." Right away. He didn't even question it. He disappeared back towards the kitchens, a woman who looked like the manager following him. "Did you drive?" Sarah asked, brushing Tally's hair behind her ear, frowning at how clammy the Norse skin was to her touch. "No," Tally confirmed, her lips sticking together as she tried to wet them with the tip of her tongue, but she was so thirsty. "Here." Sarah stood, one hand resting on Tally's shoulder as the other turned to take a sweating water glass from the table and bring it to Tally's lips. Lenore gratefully sipped at the cooling liquid. Her color improved as she drank. The returning color made Sarah's heart ease, if only slightly. Tally's eyes were lidded as she handed the drink back. "Thank you." Sarah shook her head as she cupped Tally's cheek. How could this woman be thanking her? "You and I have a lot to discuss when we get home." Tally whimpered as a single tear fell. "Promise?" "Oh, with my whole heart," Sarah assured as she pressed her lips tightly to Tally's forehead, her breath hitching in her throat. "You two should go. We'll be right behind you." Anakasha noted how many people were staring at them from around the room, a few of them even daring to pull out their cell phones. Anakasha would handle things from here and let her mother focus her attentions on Tally. Sarah assured herself that Anakasha could, in fact, handle the situation with a final look before she looped her arm under Tally's leg and around her back, easily lifting the knower from her seat. Sarah stood to her full height and made her way out of the restaurant, uncaring of anyone watching. How could she care about those strangers when she felt Tally nuzzle against her and felt the knower's warm breath blow across her neck? No, there was little more to care about in this moment than the woman in her arms. "I can walk, Sarah. Sarah." Tally sighed as she found herself picked up again and carried from the car. Thankfully, Sarah had parked the car in their private driveway, otherwise she was sure that Sarah would have carried her across half of Fort Salem. "No." Tally grinned, hiding her face against Sarah's shoulder to hide her amusement. "No?" "No." That was the only answer she was given as Sarah carried her across the threshold of their home. Tally really should have complained, but why bother? Being in Sarah's arms was exactly where she wanted to be. She was also exhausted and hadn't the energy to argue with Sarah about how she was more than capable of walking from the car into their house. Mostly because she wasn't exactly sure she had the energy to do just that. She would have tried, but chances were she had ended up exactly where she was right now, cradled in Sarah's arms. "Oh, for the love... Sarah, do not..." Tally sighed heavily as Sarah carried her towards the stairs. "Where are you..." "Anakostia and Isadora will be here soon. Shouldn't we stay downstairs?" Sarah stalled, considering that Tally was right. Anakostia and Isadora were sure to follow them back here. "No." Sarah shook her head and continued to the stairs. "They can find us upstairs." "But I'm thirsty." Sarah stopped on the third step. "Are you truly, or are you trying to..." "No, I am." Sarah changed course and walked them into the kitchen. "Here." Sarah set Tally down on one of the stools that surrounded the kitchen island. "What would you like?" "I can get..." Sarah glanced over her shoulder at Tally, who sank heavily back into her seat rather than try and stand up. All for the better, anyhow. She was dizzier than she thought. "Ice water, please." Sarah put a glass beneath the ice dispenser and then changed it to water to fill it. The crackling of the ice was the only sound in the room beyond both their beating hearts. "Thank you." Tally offered her sincere thanks as her fingers brushed over Sarah's as she took the glass. Sarah stood with her hip against the island, watching as Tally sipped at the drink. There was so much she wanted to ask, so much she wanted to say. but without Isadora she wasn't sure how to start. Isadora had mentioned their first Beltane together and how Tally had promised in that moment that she would never ask Sarah for more than she was willing to give. Sarah's spine was as stiff as it had been when she returned to the mycelium. The hairs on the back of her neck were erect as if expecting danger, but that couldn't be right. Without even opening the door, Sarah knew who was standing on the other side. And although Sarah had once underestimated Tally Craven as an opponent, it had been a long time since Sarah had ever thought she and Tally were not on the same side. Years of war would do that. Sarah steadied herself and opened the door, still somewhat surprised to see Tally awkwardly shuffling on the other side. Tally? Tally offered an uncertain smile, her eyes downcast, yet there was a resoluteness to them that Sarah had come to admire. Hi. Hi. Sarah repeated the greeting, wondering not for the second time why Tally Craven was standing at her door. Tonight of all nights. Sarah looked over Tally's shoulder and out into the darkened hallway. From further within the safe house, Sarah could hear the throes of passion many of the witches with them were enjoying. Perhaps she dared even say they were reveling in. The power in the air of the safe house was growing thicker by the hour as the witches succumbed to their desires and took from the mother as the mother gave to them. Sarah's eyes fell back to Tally when she noticed Tally shifting from foot to foot. Why was Tally not with one of the younger witches of their group? Surely there was someone amongst their assigned unit that Tally would wish to spend Beltane with. Beltane would always be a sacred day. It was a holiday that the Camarilla did not respect, but they always felt the might and fury of witch kind after it, whether they respected it or not. Dr. Albin Hurst would feel their fury, finally, in the coming days. It was why Sarah was here, in this safe house with Tally Craven and a dozen other witches, all specialists and the best the army and spree had to offer. They were on a mission to finally bring Dr. Albin Hurst to justice, to end his reign of terror, plague and other illnesses, and end this war. Why they were here, and almost enough to distract Sarah enough from the situation at hand. Almost. But really, nothing could distract her fully from Tally Craven standing at her bedroom door on Beltane. Sarah had hidden away in the smallest room of the safe house so she would not be forced to watch Tally pair off with someone else. She had come here seeking refuge and sanctuary from heartbreak, yet she feared she had willingly opened the door to it. Can I come in? Tally was nervous. The uncertainty radiated off of her like a visible heat in the coldest part of winter. Yet, no matter her nervousness, Tally was brave and sure enough to meet Sarah's eyes, which was more than others had been able to do in the past. Sarah felt the stiffness of her spine tighten and her muscles grow taut. No, it was for the best that Tally did not come in. Yet she did not say this, nor did she close the door on Tally. Rather, she stepped aside and allowed Tally to brush past her. The room Sarah had taken was one of the smaller ones. She hadn't needed anything more than a bed, as they were not going to be in the safe house for long. Unlike the safe houses that she and Tally had stayed in for weeks or months at a time, this was only temporary. There were no personal touches to the room. It was bland and only slightly warmed by the shadows of dusk spilling in through the solitary window. Tally looked around the room as she pulled at her fingers, obviously seeking some kind of comfort that was non-existent here. There was nothing for her to focus on. No knickknacks, no photos, no personal touches beyond Sarah's duffel in the corner and her uniform jacket hung on the bed frame, and the single solitary candle that Sarah had lit. She had been preparing to meditate through the night, to spend Beltane connecting to the mother through meditation, to grow her power reserves in this way rather than spend it with a lover. The only witch she had been interested in was safer not spending tonight with her. It would herald in the ruin of the most meaningful relationship Sarah had, and so she stayed away, hidden, like a coward. Yet here stood her deepest, truest temptation, come looking for her. As Tally took stock of the room she now stood within, Sarah refused to close the door. as if by leaving it open there was this form of safety to be had. Safety from what, though, was the real question. Was it safety from doing something foolish, or finally doing something right? Tally slowly turned back to Sarah, her hands idly unbuttoning her own uniform jacket. Sarah swallowed as she watched the pale column of Tally's throat bob as she unbuttoned 2, 3 buttons from top, going down, exposing soft skin and dark satin. Tally. Sarah noticed how Tally's hands trembled, and she stepped away from the door and stopped Tally's fingers from unbuttoning another button. Her eyes, treacherous things that they were, dipping low to marvel at the skin already revealed, but only for a moment before she pulled herself together. Tally. Sarah shook her head minutely from side to side. There was no need for them to do this. There was no need for them to ruin all that they had built together. There were other ways to spend Beltane. They needn't do this. They needn't, no matter how much either of them appeared to want to. Tally frowned, suddenly unable to meet Sarah's eyes. Rather, she stared down at their hands, the fizzle of energy between them literally sparking in the knower's eyes as she tried to calm her racing heart. Why? Why couldn't they have this when it was so clear it was something they had wanted for so long? Why could they not spend Beltane together? Tally nibbled on the inside of her lip. Would you prefer one of the other witches come spend the evening with you? Sarah sighed heavily. No. No, she would not want anyone else to spend tonight with her. That isn't... No, I do not. The hope that sparked in Tally's eyes worried Sarah. We do not need to do this. But what if I want to? Tally asked, her pulse racing against her neck as she just stared just short of Sarah's eyes and focused on her lips. Lips she had wanted to kiss for so long. Tally pulled one of her hands free from Sarah's grasp and brought her thumb up to the soft, plump lip. She tugged down on it with the pad of her finger and bit back a moan as the touch of it even just against her finger. Goddess, what would it be like to kiss this bottom lip with her own? What would it taste like? Sarah trembled. It was the one thing to deny herself something she wanted, had wanted for so long. But it was something else entirely to deny Tally. Tally. Sarah wondered what happened to her vast vocabulary. She found herself unable to utter anything but Tally's name. And yet that one word, that name held so much within it. Please, Tally whispered as she stepped into Sarah's personal space, eyes riveted on the lip she was still toying with. Watched as it filled back up with the color, as her hand fell and rested over Sarah's chest, her other meeting it there as she grasped tightly at Sarah's undershirt. Sarah had lived too many lifetimes to risk finding pleasure with Tally for one night, just to lose the friendship she had with Tally for it. One night of passion and power was not worth losing the depth of her relationship with Tally. There was nothing on this earth Sarah thought was worth risking Tally Craven. This will change things. It will ruin what we have. What they had fought so hard to find with each other. So many years of hard work, of learning to trust, it would be lost. Why? Tally seemed genuinely confused, and it tore at Sarah's heart. Please, Tally. Sarah grabbed both of Tally's hands and pulled them away from her chest, and held them just a few centimeters away from her chest. Her eyes were more open than they had been in what felt like centuries. How could Tally not see that Tally could ruin her, that Tally had ruined her? Sarah, I want you. Sarah squeezed her eyes closed. Just for tonight? How could the thought of Tally wanting her for only one night be a balm and a curse? No, but how could Tally say that when it was becoming clear that Sarah didn't even want to be with her this one night, let alone every night after it? I would not risk losing you or what we have built. Your friendship and place in my life means far too much to me than you realize, Craven. I will not risk sullying all that we've been through for one night. It is just one night, Sarah. Doesn't, it doesn't have to be more than that. I swear, Sarah, if all you want, all you're comfortable with is one night, then that's all it will be. Tally leaned forward and kissed at Sarah's knuckles, frowning when Sarah dropped her hands as if burned. No, that wouldn't do. Tally met Sarah's shadowed eyes and softened her own gaze. She raised her hand up to rest one hand over the general's heart. She pressed her palm there as the other cupped her neck. I love you, Sarah. I've loved you for so long. And this, being with you now, tonight, won't change that. Tally smiled, doing her best to be reassuring. Being with you tonight won't ruin anything. If you don't want more beyond tonight, then tonight is all we'll have. Unless you want more. Only if you want more. Tally felt the air around her seize just as her heart did within her chest. I swear it. I will not push for anything more than what you are willing to give, what you want. Tally stepped closer to Sarah, forcing the taller woman to take a step back to keep some distance between them. Sarah kept retreating, her heart lodged in her throat, keeping her silent, as each of Tally's promises sparked in the air between them, the sparks burning into their skin with the depth of their assurances, each spark, each ember burning away a little bit more of Sarah's worries, or her fears. Each fear and worry was replaced with a clear want, desire, for everything that this night could offer them, every dream and every fantasy that could finally be fulfilled. Please, can we please have tonight? Tally brushed her nose over Sarah's, her eyes fluttering closed as Sarah's breath ghosted over her lips, tempting fate. Sarah, in the last vestiges of her control, turned her head to the side just as Tally's lips would have brushed across her own. Instead, they found her cheek. Tally felt breathless as tears pricked at her eyes, her lips wet against Sarah's cheek as she asked, Do you want me, Sarah? Sarah whined, because how? How could she not answer that question truthfully? How could she not admit to this beautiful woman that she had wanted her for far longer than was appropriate? Yes, Sarah growled, angry with herself for admitting to such weaknesses and such desires. And let me have you. Let us have each other. Please. Tally begged, pressing tightly up against Sarah. I swear, Sarah, that you decide what you want from us from here. Just. Sarah growled as her fingers got lost in Tally's hair and pulled the knower against her. The crash of their lips and the resulting moan almost loud enough to hide the resounding click of the door as it closed, and it stole away the last vestiges of Sarah's self-control. Just tonight. Sarah swore as she cradled Tally's face between her palms, staring into desire-darkened eyes, needing Tally to understand that tonight was all they could share. It was all they could risk, and it was already risking too much, but Goddess help her. She couldn't turn away again. Not again. Tally nodded her head quickly, readily, and happily swearing to anything. Just tonight. It was strange how clear the memory could come through to her now. Their first Beltane together was a treasured memory. It always has been and always would be for Sarah. Still, the ease with which she could recall how Tally's promises had felt warm against her skin as if there had been work in them. As she thought back to it now, she had to wonder why she never pieced this together before. Tally was never one to come looking for Sarah on Beltane after the first. It always had to be Sarah that sought Tally out. Even this year, Tally had been in Germany and in another country, and Sarah had gone. Flown across the ocean to be with her, and yet Here they were, trapped in this loop because as much as Sarah's actions and Tally's actions spoke of their love for each other, Sarah, the only one capable of saying it and voicing it, hadn't. Somehow this is harder now that I know that you want more and have been kept silent by a working you cannot control, Sarah admitted, knowing that she could trust Tally with her fears, just as she had for all these years, all except one. Tally tilted her head to the side. It's okay, she promised. No matter what Sarah said, it would be okay. She knew that. I'm not going anywhere. No, I suppose you're not, but how much of this is by your own choosing and the working made you weak? Sarah inquired, curious. Tally chuckled. I mean, it's probably 30-70 right now? Mm-hmm. Sarah. Tally hated how Sarah couldn't meet her eyes. Hated that she was trapped in this silence when all she wanted was to comfort the woman in front of her. No matter what, she was not about to leave Sarah. Sarah meant far too much to Tally to ever leave her. And if for just a moment, if Tally could reassure Sarah that nothing she said would cause Sarah's fears to be realized, Tally would take it. Even if it was hard to speak, that her mouth felt as dry and parched as a desert was during high noon. Sarah looked down, her lips pulling into a tight smile as she felt Tally brush her hand over her chin. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment as she settled under Tally's touch. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? It was the opportunity she had been speaking with David about, the one she had promised she would find while Tally was home. But now that it all felt like a lifetime ago, everything that happened yesterday felt like it had been years. Come here. Tally beckoned Sarah closer. Sarah stepped closer, Tally's legs settling on either side of her hips as she stood between the Noah's legs, as Tally's arms wrapped around her waist. Tally rested her cheek against Sarah's breast and listened to her heartbeat beneath. This, being so close to Tally, was second nature to Sarah now. It was hard sometimes to imagine that they hadn't always been just naturally drawn to each other and just this comfortable. But it was something they had worked towards. It wasn't as if they began the relationship this close. This soft comfort they found in each other had been earned. After many days and months and years, it had taken time, so much time, to find themselves in this place. In a place that before this evening, Sarah had cherished and adored in a way she adored very little. As confused and sad and angry and reeling as Sarah was, there was nothing like finding herself in Tally Craven's arms, feeling Tally's head on her shoulder and breath on her skin. The longer Sarah remained quiet, the more anxious Tally became. The only thing centering her through the panic that was darkening her vision around the edges was the gentle touch of Sarah's fingers as they began combing through her hair. I had decided, come to an important decision before this evening, one that I had wanted to share with you before you returned to Germany. Sarah offered up the slightest of smiles. Her nerves made her feel nauseous as she slid her fingers through Tally's hair, watching her fingers sift through the tresses as if the motion was hypnotic and could calm her racing heart. I had just been, well, I want to say biding my time, but that's not right. I was scared. It was still an almost shameful admission for her, for General Alder, to be scared of anything. So much of her life had been lived without fear, or yet perhaps it had been so consumed by it that she became numb to it. Yet here she sat as skittish as a newborn experiencing their first storm. It was exhilarating and yet terrifying. I allowed my fears to keep me silent as I have for the last 4 years. I was not silenced by a powerful working. I was silenced by myself, by my own cowardice. I would have lived the rest of my life as it were, Tally. Sarah needed Tally to understand that she would still live a happy life even without Tally as a lover. So long as it meant that we remained as close as we were, and shared what we have together, I would have lived a happy life, with you, whether by my side as a friend, confidant, staunch supporter, and Beltane lover. I would have even supported any future relationships you might have had if you were to find happiness with someone else. It would have pained me greatly. It will pain me greatly if that is the path you choose. But as I said this evening, I would welcome you here, in this place. I want it to be your home, with children, or a spouse. Sarah's voice caught in her throat as she dropped her head, so that her forehead pressed up against Tally's. The puffs of Tally's hitched breathing slipped through the single open button of her blouse, even as Tally's arms tightened their hold around her and kept her from leaving. As if she'd ever dream of trying to leave Tally's arms now. Oh, Tally, I had such hope and such fervent wishes that I might be your chosen, your lover, your spouse. I would not just be an aunt. God has forbid a grandmother to your children. Grandmare, Tally whispered, even as her jaw trembled and she clutched tightly at the back of Sarah's blouse, which she had certainly wrinkled with her death grip. With every word Sarah spoke, with every wish she spoke of, and of the life she wanted with Tally, the hope she held for them, the weight upon Tally's chest and the brick holding down her tongue, receded. Sarah chuckled, her eyes closing as she pulled Tally closer, her hand grasping the back of her neck to keep them pressed so intimately together. Goddess forbid a grandmere to your children. I had hoped to be a mother, with you, to them, to our children. Sarah stressed, watching as tears filled Tally's eyes. To be by your side and see all of your dreams and wishes come true. To be there to help you achieve every one of them and selfishly relish in your happiness. This was everything Tally had wanted to hear. Every last word she had been hoping Sarah might say to her for the last 4 years. 4 long, wonderful years. The tears were not of sadness, but of joy. A joy she still had no way of expressing. The need for the general to look into her eyes as she spoke suddenly too much for her. The way Sarah gently cupped the back of her neck as her other hand slid over her cheek, her thumb wiping away Tally's falling tears, was so sweet, so familiar, and perfect. It was perfect. Sarah, Tally whimpered, trying to pull herself into Sarah's very being, to be completely absorbed by the taller woman, as she would be happy to spend the rest of her existence as a part of Sarah. Sarah leaned back just enough so that she could tip Tally's chin up, and they could look into each other's eyes. Tally's breath caught at the expressive blue eyes that held such a beautiful storm in them as they promised her the world she'd only dreamed could exist. Tally stared at the slight upturn of Sarah's lips, listened and watched the nervous bobble of her throat as she swallowed down her silence and continued speaking. There isn't anything I do not want with you, Tally. Nothing. The reverence and practical fealty in the words had Tally's head spinning in such a beautifully joyous way. I love you with all that I am, all that I have been, and all that I will be. Sarah felt as if she was weightless as she confessed her feelings that had been weighing her down for so long in their secrecy. Tally Craven, I love you and I want everything with you. And I am so very sorry that it has taken me so long to say these things to you. I am so sorry I have made us wait so long. Sarah's palms cupped beneath Tally's chin as she tried and failed to keep up with erasing the tears that painted Tally's cheeks. The tears were in stark contrast to the ear-splitting smile that caused Tally's dimples to emerge. The smile, more than the tears, had Sarah's own eyes watering. May I kiss you? Tally broke. The dam that had been barely holding back the torrential outpouring of her emotions broke into a million pieces against the weight of her tears. Please, Tally's heart felt like it was going to combust in her chest. Please, Tally begged, her own hands lifting up from where they'd fallen between them to grab a fistful each of Sarah's blouse as Sarah closed the distance between them. And goddess bless a kiss. Outside of Beltane, an honest to goddess kiss, outside the hours and confines of Beltane. A both blessed and cursed day. Fucking finally! Tally's grip on Sarah's shirt tightened as she relished the touch of Sarah's lips against her own. The pressing weight that had remained against her cheek vanished into nothingness as the simple touch of Sarah's lips. It was such a freeing feeling. She had always known that Sarah's kisses could make her fly, but she hadn't realized just how weightless she could become with them. Tally hated to break the kiss, hated it, but she needed to. She needed to say so much. Whimpering at her own actions, Tally pulled away, groaning as Sarah's grip tightened on the back of her neck and held her closer, not ready to lose her just yet. And who was Tally to complain when she was kissing Sarah Alder on a day that was not May 1st? Sarah, Sarah, Tally moaned as if she felt the touch of Sarah's tongue against her bottom lip, followed by the nip of her teeth, and oh, Tally truly forgot how intoxicating it was to kiss Sarah. She longed for it 364 days of the year. But it was like in that time she always forgot how good it felt to be kissed by Sarah, how good Sarah was at leaving her a whimpering, needy mess. Tally wrapped her legs around Sarah's hips and barely even made a sound, barely, when Sarah lifted her clear off the kitchen stool and carried her out of the kitchen. Tally groaned as her back was pressed firmly against a hallway wall there, or the doorway to the kitchen in Sarah's haste to get them upstairs. Tally understood. She did. She understood the desperation of each of Sarah's kisses, the need to be assured that this was not another one of the many dreams they both certainly had, that they would not pull apart just to wake up alone in their beds. Tally understood. Goddess, did she understand? But she had waited 4 years. 4 long years to say this, and she wasn't waiting another moment. Not one more. Sarah, please, just wait. Oh, just one moment, please. Tally unhooked her legs from around Sarah's waist, but with Sarah's hands cupping her backside, she was kept from standing on her own 2 feet. Tally's eyes were lidded, and her breathing was short and swift, her heart pounding restlessly against her chest, her ribs hardly able to contain it. Stop for 1 moment. Please, just 1 moment, and I promise, oh, I promise I will spend the rest of the night kissing you. Please? Tally begged, her fingers curling over the top of Sarah's shoulder as she smiled in pure elation. The tears finally slowed and her cheeks were cold from their remnants, but she didn't care. How could she? Please, I just need to say this now because I've wanted to say this for 4 long years. Tally shook her head, laughing at herself, until she noticed how the sparkle in Sarah's eyes dimmed just a bit and the muscles beneath her fingers tensed. Tally shook her head. No, please, there's nothing to worry about. Tally leaned back in and kissed her. And oh, how amazing was it that she could do that now without a splitting headache or risk of passing out. How wonderful was it that she could say, I love you, Sarah Alter. Oh, it was wonderful. It was like waking up to a beautiful sunny day after a week of rain and seeing that first rainbow of the season all rolled up into one. I love you more than anyone on this earth, and I've wanted to say that to you for it feels like an eternity. And I am so sorry I couldn't before now. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you how much I love you, and that I have loved you all this time, because I have. Tally watched Sarah's jaw tremble with the attempt to contain her own emotional response to Tally's words. I have loved you for every second of every day, for the last 8 years. Because she knew she had been in love with Sarah Alder long before they shared their first Beltane together. She had loved Sarah, had truly loved her, and accepted that love a year into the war with the Camarilla. I needed to say that. It had been so hard to be unable to verbalize her love for Sarah for the last 4 years. So hard. And as she watched tears fall from Sarah's blue eyes, she knew those 4 years, the forced silence, had equally affected Sarah as well. I will tell you every day, multiple times a day, how much I love you, for as long as you want to hear it. Sarah leaned forward so her nose brushed over Tally's. It was odd how she had never felt more grounded and present in a single moment, but also knew if she hummed, she could find herself floating up into the ceiling above her, Tally still wrapped around her as they flew together. Anacostia flinched from where she stood at the doorway to her mother's house, Isadora beside her as they both stared at the sight of Tally Craven wrapped around Sarah Alder like the general was a tree and Tally a handsy koala. Isadora was trying, and failing, to remain unaffected by Anacostia's obvious distress at the sight, and Tally's promises, though the smile on the Major General's face spoke of how happy she was for her mother and Tally. God as fuck, you are both too sweet. Too sickly sweet. Just have a good rest of your night. Anacostia shook her head, laughing, and slowly made her way towards the door. Isadora smiling and following after her, after dropping a plastic bag of food just inside the house, sure that after the two witches got reacquainted they were going to be hungry. Tally's face was scarlet as she hid it against Sarah's neck, mortified that Anacostia and Isadora were across from them, staring, and had heard everything she just said out loud. Sarah hardly cared. The only visitors that would stop her from taking Tally up to bed with her would have been the young ones, and seeing as neither Willa, Gemma, or Cameron were at the door, she would not be deterred from her goal. I am glad it worked out. I knew it would. Which wasn't the full truth. She'd hoped it would work out. Dinner's on us. Do be sure to keep hydrated and fed. Especially you, Craven. That working was a nasty one. Tally laughed against Sarah's neck, still unwilling to look away just yet. Not when she could also be peppering Sarah's neck with kisses and making the general sigh. Just like that, as her teeth scraped across the sensitive spot just beneath her ear. Sarah grinned. Thank you, Isadora. I will ensure she's well taken care of. Isadora grinned. I'm sure you will, General. Truly, thank you both. I owe you so much. So much that she didn't have the words to express just how much she owed her sister and friend for their help in making this very moment, and all the moments to follow, a reality. Tally couldn't look away from Sarah, even as she heard Isadora and Anacostia making their way from the room. Good. She could use some privacy with Sarah. A lot of privacy. They had a lot of time to make up for. Nonsense, Isadora promised, waving off Tally's debt. She didn't want it, nor need it. Come on, Isa. Anna pulled at Isadora's arm, unwilling to look back into the house to see just what Tally was doing to make her mother sigh like that. The moment the front door was closed, Sarah grinned as she turned into Tally's touch, her eyes fluttering in tempo with her heart. Where was I? Tally got lost in the depths of Sarah's eyes, and nearly swooned as Sarah brushed her lips over Tally's witch's mark. Tally swallowed thickly as she felt the air between them crackle with the same energy that sustained them from one Beltane to the next. Sarah grinned as Tally's eyes returned to her. What was that promise again? Sarah asked, eyes sparkling. Her head tilted to the side as if she had to honestly think about the promise that Tally had issued, when she knew it and was looking forward to it immensely. Ah, yes. You'd kiss me for the rest of the evening if I gave you one moment to confess your love. My unyielding, unbending, and unbroken love, Tally corrected, as Sarah huffed as she rolled her eyes, even as her cheeks flamed with the affection she felt from Tally's words. Tally laughed. Yes, but yes. I did promise that, and that is a promise I'll willingly, Sarah stressed the point, needing one final reassurance. Tally's smile softened, a surprised squeal leaving her as Sarah grabbed her hip and laid her out on the couch as Sarah hovered above her. Oh, her voice deepened. More than willingly kept, Sarah. Good. I hope so. Sarah leaned forward to begin helping Tally keep this particular promise. Sarah smiled at Tally as she carried the woman up the stairs and down the hallway that led to Sarah's own bedroom. They'd spend the night in Sarah's room and discuss where they would spend the rest of their nights together later, when there wasn't years' worth of kisses and touches to make up for. Tally grinned as she noticed which room they'd been brought into. Your room, huh? Of course. Tonight I'm in charge. Sarah grinned as she deposited Tally down on the edge of the bed, keeping Tally's legs wrapped around her legs, even as her hands fell to the hem of her blouse and she lifted it clean off in one smooth pull. Tally's eyes narrowed as her hands fell to Sarah's abs, hands that were quickly followed by her mouth. Oh, is that so? Tally laughed as she unbuttoned Sarah's slacks and started to push them down. The sound of Tally's laugh lit a torch inside Sarah's very soul that warmed her whole being. It is very so, Sarah promised, even as her eyes fluttered at Tally's touch, the general skin pebbling in goosebumps as Tally's palms slid up the length of her abdomen and cupped her breasts. Well then, Miss I'm in charge, Tally teased as she made her way up the length of Sarah's bed, pulling off her own sweater and slacks as she went. Why don't you come join me on the bed? It'd be my pleasure. Tally arched up into Sarah as she laid over her. Well, we'll see whose pleasure it is. Yes, we shall. Sarah had no desire to tease or bicker or argue. Not tonight. Not now. Not when for the first time in centuries she had all she wanted right in front of her. Just as she'd always wanted.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.